it is a relatively new agency, I guess, in the span of the American government. Just briefly tell us, what authority does ICE have? Where are they situated? From whence do they come?
Well, there's a lot to say about ICE for sure, and they've certainly been in news cycle a lot over the last year, definitely. They've actually been around for about 15 years now, and they are essentially the agency under DHS, under the Department of Homeland Security, that's charged with enforcing our immigration laws. And a big part of that has been the detention of undocumented immigrants and people awaiting deportation or going through deportation proceedings. And that has happened in, dozens and now more than 100 centers all across the country, some operated by the government itself and most privately operated by private prison companies that have grown massively over the last years of the Obama administration and then even more this past year under the Trump administration. And on any given day today, detain about 40,000 women, men, and children. So this is a pretty sprawling detention system. And in fact, some advocates take issue with the fact that we call it detention because detention gives the sense, gives this idea that it is a temporary situation, that you're held up for a little while your situation gets figured out and then you're free to go. When in fact, what ICE detention is to the people who are held in detention is imprisonment, sometimes for months, sometimes for years, and imprisonment in pretty terrible conditions, as my story documents.
Yeah, and it's very disturbing circumstances. So ICE, or the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, came out of essentially the Homeland Security Act. It is part of the Department of Homeland Security. So this is a relatively new agency, and you folks at The Intercept have been on this story for at least a couple of years, searching as to the records of how detainees are treated. And we should be clear here. Let's just start with what could get you into a detention center, because I think there is a sense, and maybe to a certain extent, if you go back to 2008, the nature of the people that ICE has been detaining has changed, at least in terms of what they're accused of. Is that not correct?
I think that the application of, or rather the targets ICE has focused at different moments in its history have changed. The target, their legitimate, so to speak, population target is always undocumented immigrants, so people who are not legally authorized to be in the country. The difference that we're seeing more recently is that for a long time, ICE and federal authorities in general pretty much ignored a vast majority of undocumented immigrants and focused on those who have been accused of committing crimes, who have been convicted of crimes. Now that target has expanded quite significantly under the Trump administration, and we've seen a huge number of people who are detained on nothing else but their immigration violations. So people who haven't been convicted of crimes, some of them have been convicted of the crime of reentry, which means it's people that were deported before and then re-entered the United States, which is considered a crime. But, as immigration advocates will say, it's an immigration-specific crime. It's something that's related to their status. But for instance, something else that we're observing in a lot of states is people who are picked up for traffic violations and processed through the system and set up for deportation because of that. And in many cases, that happens because they're driving without a license, which is a crime, but is a crime due to the fact that undocumented immigrants aren't able to get licenses in a majority of states. So there's certainly a broadening of the target that we've seen in recent years. And as the target has broadened, we've also seen a massive expansion of the number of people that are detained. Now, not everybody that's going through deportation proceedings remains in detention. A number of people are given bond. and yet many others aren't, and some of them are stuck for months or years while waiting for that bond or while fighting their deportation
right, so Alicia,
through the courts.
So we have a situation where under the Obama administration, there was particularly in the early years of the Obama administration, the number of arrests and deportations were quite high relative to where they were, let's say, in 2015, 2016. But as you note, ICE was specifically targeting people who had committed a crime. To be in this country without proper documentation, or overstaying your visa, or coming into the country without a visa, is a civil violation. It is not a criminal violation. Statutorily, it does not become a criminal act until you are deported and then come back in for the second time, like you said. But most of the arrests were focused on folks who had committed a crime that was not associated with immigration whatsoever. Maybe they assaulted somebody, maybe they stole something. And this changed, and this was the biggest dramatic change, like you say, under the Trump administration, where the Trump administration basically said to ICE, yeah, we are no longer going to exercise any discretion. You don't have to narrow your pursuit of apprehending subjects to people who have just committed a crime. You can go after people who have committed a civil violation, i.e. overstaying their visa or being in this country without proper documentation. And that's why we hear so many more stories of people who have been in this country for 30 years being arrested, or people who are here under any given type of program, had been regularly visiting ICE, and then after years of visiting ICE on a monthly basis, were apprehended for no apparent reason because ICE essentially took the shackles off and stopped using its discretion in terms of where its resources will be most valued, and therefore the amount of detention space that was literally needed has increased. When we come back, I want to talk about your findings as to the way that people have been treated. Your findings are over the course of a 6-year period, if I'm not mistaken. They are incredibly disturbing. And one of the things I want to hear from you is this something that we would imagine has gotten worse as the numbers of people who've gotten detained? Because we have seen a spike in arrests, but of course the system to deport people cannot absorb all these arrests. And so we have far more detentions and far more arrests. We got to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Sam Seder, Ring of Fire Radio. I'm talking to Alicia Sperry of The Intercept on their massive piece on the abuses that have been taking place in ICE detention. We're going to take a quick break. Be right back.